The lye soap was eating through the skin on her knuckles again. Rory Blackwood ignored the raw, stinging burn, scrubbing harder at the marble floor. The pressure was a familiar pain, a grounding one. It was better than the hollow ache in her chest. The one that had been her constant companion for as long as she could remember. The reflection that stared back from the polished stone was a stranger, a pale, gaunt girl with hair dyed the color of a starless night, a stark contrast to the silver-white roots that stubbornly insisted on showing. A heavy boot stopped inches from her hand. Rory didn't have to look up. The scent of old leather and stale cigar smoke was enough. "Get up," Marcus Blackwood commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "And for Luna's sake, try to look less like a kicked puppy. You're an embarrassment." She rose slowly, her joints protesting. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor. Looking her uncle in the eye was a mistake she had learned not to make. It was an invitation for a backhand, a reminder of her place. He grunted, a sound of profound dissatisfaction. "Come with me. We have business to discuss." The word business sent a chill down her spine, colder than the drafty halls of the Blackwood Manor. Her business was scrubbing floors, mending clothes, and staying invisible. Marcus's business was different. It involved shouting matches behind closed doors, the smell of fear from visiting pack members, and debts. Always. There were debts. She followed him into his study, the one room in the house that truly felt like him, dark, suffocating, and filled with the ghosts of dead animals. A massive taxidermy wolf snarled silently from the wall above the fireplace, its glass eyes forever fixed in a state of lifeless aggression. Marcus slumped into his oversized leather chair, the springs groaning under his weight. He gestured to the simple wooden stool in front of his desk, the one reserved for servants and supplicants. Rory sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "Our pack is in trouble. Aurora," he began, using her full name, a tactic he employed when he wanted to assert his authority. "Years of poor harvests, failed trades. We are on the verge of ruin. We owe a debt, a significant one." Rory said nothing. She knew this. She'd heard the whispers among the other pack members, seen the worried glances exchanged over meager dinners. "The Northern Territories," he continued, his eyes narrowing. "Their Alpha King has called in the marker. He's not a patient man." The name hit the air like a physical blow. The Northern Territories, ruled by the Beast King, a monster of myth and nightmare, a boogeyman used to frighten werewolf pups into behaving. They said he had slaughtered an entire rival pack in a single night, men, women, children. They said the snow in his lands was permanently stained red with their blood. "What does this have to do with me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus leaned forward, a cruel smile twisting his lips. It didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. "The debt is too large to be paid in coin or land. Alpha King Ashford requires a different compensation. He is a beast, and a beast needs a distraction, something to keep its claws occupied." A thick, syrupy dread began to pool in her stomach. "I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," he sneered. "You're an Omega, weak, pliable, unmated. You are the perfect payment. You are the perfect gift to appease a monster." The room tilted. The snarling wolf on the wall seemed to blur. "No," she breathed. The word a puff of air. "No, you can't." "I can. It's already done." He slid a heavy parchment across the desk. It was a contract, sealed with the dire wolf crest of the Ashford pack. "You will be sent to the Ashford territory on the next full moon. You are our pack's offering to the Beast King, to settle our debt." For the first time in years, a fire ignited in the hollow space in her chest, not the slow burn of resentment, but a hot white flash of pure defiance. "I won't go. I am not a piece of property. You can't sell me." She stood up so quickly the stool clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in the sudden. tense silence. Marcus's face darkened into a thunderous mask of rage. He moved faster than a man his size should be able to, his hand striking her across the face with the force of a battering ram. The impact sent her sprawling onto the floor, the sharp corner of the desk digging into her ribs. Her cheek exploded with pain, and the coppery taste of blood filled her mouth. He loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You are exactly what I say you are," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "You are a worthless orphan I took in out of the kindness of my heart. You live under my roof, you eat my food, and you will do as I command. You will go to him, and you will be grateful for the sacrifice you are making for this pack. Do you understand me?" Tears of pain and fury welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She just stared at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, focusing on a single crimson thread. "I said," he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you understand me?" A strangled sob escaped her lips. "Yes." "Good." He straightened his jacket, his composure restored. "Guards take her to the cellar. She'll remain there until the transport arrives. I don't want her causing any more trouble." 2 burly guards hauled her to her feet. They didn't speak, their grips like iron vices on her arms as they dragged her from the study, down a long hallway, and towards a heavy oak door. The smell of damp earth and decay hit her as they descended the stone steps into the darkness. They threw her inside, the sound of the heavy bolt sliding into place echoing like a death sentence. She was left in total blackness, the cold stone floor seeping into her bones. She curled into a ball, the pain in her cheek a dull throb against the roaring agony in her soul. She was being sent to a monster, a sacrifice to save a pack that had never considered her one of their own. As despair threatened to consume her, a new sound cut through the silence. It wasn't the scuttling of rats or the drip of water. It was a whisper, soft as moonlight, that seemed to come from inside her own mind. It was a voice she had never heard before, ancient and feminine, yet achingly familiar. "Child of silver," the voice murmured, a gentle caress against her frayed nerves. "Do not be afraid. Soon you will be home." The journey north was a blur of darkness and steel. Rory was shackled, her wrists and ankles bound in cold iron that chafed her skin raw. She was in the back of an armored transport, the windows blacked out, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. Her guards, 2 grim-faced warriors from the northern pack, had not spoken a single word to her since they'd pulled her from the cellar. They looked at her not as a person, but as cargo, dangerous cargo. Hours bled into days. The rhythmic jostle of the vehicle was the only measure of time. When they finally stopped, the sudden silence was deafening. The rear doors opened, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she saw the sky. It was wrong. There was no sun, only a bruised, perpetual twilight, filtered through a thick blanket of gunmetal gray clouds. The air that rushed in was sharp and cold, smelling of pine needles, wet stone, and something else, something wild and predatory. She was hauled out of the transport, her shackled feet stumbling on the gravel. Before her lay the Northern Territory. It was a land of brutal beauty, a landscape forged from shadow and stone. Jagged black mountains clawed at the oppressive sky like skeletal fingers. A dense, primeval forest of dark pines blanketed the valleys. A sea of impenetrable green and black. There was no moon in the sky, not even a sliver, as if the land itself had rejected its light. And nestled in the heart of it all, carved into the side of the largest mountain, was Ashford Castle. It wasn't a castle. It was a fortress, a monolithic structure of black granite, its towers and ramparts looking less like a home and more like a prison. It seemed to absorb what little light existed, exuding an aura of ancient power and profound sorrow. Her uncle Marcus was waiting for them, flanked by 2 of his own men. He looked pleased with himself, a smug little smile playing on his lips as he saw her emerge, bound and disheveled. He didn't even glance at her. His attention was on a tall, lean man who stepped out from the castle's massive iron-studded doors. This man moved with a quiet, efficient grace. He had sandy blonde hair and kind eyes, a startling contrast to the grim surroundings. But there was a weariness in those eyes, a deep-seated sadness that spoke of things no man his age should have witnessed. "Alpha Blackwood," the man said, his voice calm and level. "I am Theo Ashford, Beta to the Alpha King." Marcus gave a short, arrogant bow. "Beta Theo, we have brought the payment, as agreed." He thrust a rolled-up parchment towards Theo. "The contract." Theo took the parchment but didn't open it. His gaze finally fell on Rory, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pity. It was almost worse than the guard's indifference. "Unchain her," Theo commanded the northern guards. They obeyed instantly, the heavy shackles falling away with a clatter. Rory rubbed her raw wrists, the sudden freedom feeling alien. "She will be taken to the West Tower," Theo said, his voice betraying no emotion. "She will be fed and cleaned. The Alpha King will see her when he is ready." As Rory was led away by two female servants, she overheard Marcus's final, triumphant words to Theo. "She's an Omega, docile. She will serve her purpose well. She will do whatever is necessary to soothe the Alpha King's..." The words echoed in her mind as the great doors of the castle closed behind her, shutting out the last sliver of the world she knew. She was led through cavernous, torchlit halls. The air was cold, the stone walls bare except for ancient tapestries depicting brutal battles between men and beasts. There was no warmth here, no life, only silence and shadows. The servants who guided her were silent, their eyes downcast, but Rory could feel their fear. It was a palpable thing, a scent in the air like ozone before a storm. As they passed a group of kitchen staff huddled in an alcove, she caught their whispers, sharp and frantic like the rustling of mice. "The one from the Blackwood pack. The sacrifice. Pity the poor thing. She won't last a week." "Did you hear what happened last month to the scout who brought bad news? The Alpha King tore. They say he killed 47 of them in one night, ripped them apart with his bare hands, didn't even shift." 47. The number stuck in her brain, a cold, hard stone. The servants left her in a small, sterile waiting room with a single barred window. She was no one's wife. She was not a guest. She was a sacrifice, a piece of meat thrown to a caged beast to keep it from tearing down the walls. The rage from her uncle's study was gone, replaced by a chilling, paralyzing terror. She waited. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The silence of the castle pressed in on her, broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. She was a lamb in the wolf's den, and she could hear the monster pacing just beyond the door. Dante's point of view. Pain was his anchor. The splintering of wood, the tearing of canvas, the protest of his own muscles, these were the things that kept the beast at bay. In the cavernous training hall, deep in the heart of the castle, Dante Ashford moved like a phantom of destruction. He wasn't training. He was trying to exhaust the rage that perpetually simmered beneath his skin. A wooden training dummy, thick as a tree trunk, met the edge of his hand. It shattered, sending splinters flying across the stone floor. He didn't feel it. All he felt was the insatiable hunger of the beast inside him, a creature born of grief and a thirst for vengeance that had festered for 10 long years. Blood on the snow? The image flashed behind his eyes, sharp and unwelcome as always. His sister, Lily, 8 years old, her silver blonde hair fanned out against the pristine white, a stark, beautiful contrast to the crimson blossoming from the wound in her chest. Her eyes, the same amber as his, were wide and vacant. He could still feel the phantom weight of her small, cold body in his arms. He could still smell the blood. He could always smell the blood. Dante. Theo's voice cut through the red haze. He was the only one who dared enter the training hall when Dante was like this. Dante didn't turn. He drove his fist into the stone wall, the impact echoing like a gunshot. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the granite. This time, he felt a sharp lance of pain in his knuckles. Good. "What is it, Theo?" he growled, his voice a rasp of disuse. "The offering from the Blackwood pack has arrived," Theo said, his tone carefully neutral. "The girl." Dante finally stopped, his broad back heaving with each ragged breath. "I told Marcus I wanted his resources, his trade routes. I don't need a hostage." He turned, and the fury in his eyes made even his unflappable cousin take a half-step back. "I don't need a pet Omega to warm my bed. Kill her. Send her head back to Marcus. It will be a more effective message." "I don't think that would be wise," Theo said calmly. He held out a small, framed photograph that the Blackwood envoy had provided. "Just look at her." Dante snatched the photo, his first instinct to crush it in his hand, but his eyes caught the image, and he froze. A girl, small, fragile-looking, with wide, haunted eyes the color of a stormy sky. Her hair was a flat, lifeless black, but there was something about the line of her jaw, the delicate curve of her neck, something that made the beast inside him stir. It wasn't the usual growl of aggression or bloodlust. It was something else entirely. A low, deep thrum that vibrated through his bones. It was a sound of recognition. The scent of blood in his memory faded, replaced by a phantom fragrance he couldn't place, something like night-blooming jasmine and cold, clean moonlight. Impossible. "What is her name?" Dante asked, his voice suddenly quiet. "Aurora Blackwood," Theo replied, watching him carefully. Aurora, Dawn, a ridiculous name for someone who looked like she lived in perpetual twilight. He didn't know why. He didn't understand the sudden, fierce curiosity that overrode a decade of apathy. It wasn't pity. It wasn't lust. It was something primal, an instinct he couldn't ignore. The beast wanted to see her. It needed to. "Bring her to my private study, Tsai," he commanded, dropping the photo onto a bench. "Now." Rory's point of view. The heavy oak door to the waiting room swung open without a sound. He stood there, framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the torchlight of the hall. He was a creature carved from night and fury, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders so broad they seemed to strain the seams of his simple black tunic. His hair was the color of jet, a chaotic mess that fell across a brow creased with a permanent scowl. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. They were the color of molten gold, of pure, predatory amber, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that felt like a physical weight, pinning her to her chair. This was no mere alpha. This was an apex predator, a king, a god of death. He moved into the room, and the temperature seemed to drop. He walked with a silent, lethal grace, his presence so overwhelming it was suffocating. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her, forcing her to crane her neck to look up at him. The scent of him filled the small space pine, cold mountain air, and something metallic, like freshly spilled blood. He said nothing. He just watched her, his amber eyes scanning every inch of her face, his expression unreadable, carved from stone. Rory's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She was certain he could hear it. She was certain he was about to rip it from her chest. Then, he did something that shattered her composure completely. He leaned down, his face coming so close to hers she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His eyes were inches away, and she saw the flecks of red that swam in their golden depths. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was inhaling, a deep, shuddering sound that was more animal than man. He drew in the scent of her hair, her skin, his nostrils flaring slightly. Terror gave way to a strange, electric shock that jolted through her entire body. No one had ever been this close to her. No one had ever looked at her with such raw, consuming focus. When he finally pulled back, his expression had changed. The stony mask had cracked, replaced by a look of stark, utter confusion, and something else, something darker. His eyes, impossibly, bled from amber to a burning, furious crimson. The beast was looking out now. His first words, when they finally came, were not a shout or a threat. They were a low, guttural whisper that seemed torn from the depths of his soul. You smell like the moon." The words made no sense, yet they resonated somewhere deep inside her, waking something that had been asleep for a very long time. He straightened to his full, intimidating height, his eyes still burning red. His gaze swept over her one last time, a possessive, branding look that made her feel as though she'd been claimed. "From this night on, you belong to me," he declared, his voice a low command that left no room for argument. "No one in this castle is to touch you. No one is to harm you." He took a step back, the corner of his mouth twisting into something that wasn't a smile. But do not mistake that for kindness. It is merely instinct. And with that, the Beast King turned and walked out, leaving Rory alone, trembling in a silence that was now filled with his scent and the echo of his impossible words. Her new home was a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The servants led her from the study up a winding stone staircase to the highest room in the West Tower. The chamber was opulent, far grander than any room in the Blackwood Manor. A massive four-poster bed draped in dark velvet dominated the space. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves. It was the room of a cherished guest, a princess. But when Rory tried the heavy oak door, she found it locked from the outside. The elegant arched window, which offered a breathtaking, terrifying view of the jagged peaks, was fitted with subtle but unbreakable iron bars. She was a prisoner, a prized pet. She spent the first day exploring her confines, her fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound books she couldn't focus on, her eyes scanning the intricate tapestry that depicted a great silver wolf howling at a full moon. A sense of crushing isolation settled over her. She was utterly alone, in a land of shadows, owned by a monster whose eyes turned the color of blood. Later that evening, an old servant woman brought her a tray of food. She was stooped with age, her face a road map of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and held a flicker of sympathy. "My name is Magda," she said, her voice a soft, reedy whisper as she set the tray down on a small table. The meal was surprisingly lavish roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a steaming vegetable stew. "Thank you," Rory managed to say, her own voice hoarse. Magda lingered by the door, wringing her gnarled hands in her apron. "You must eat, child. Keep your strength up." Rory looked at the old woman, a desperate need for a kind word, for any human connection, welling up inside her. "Why am I locked in?" Magda's gaze darted nervously towards the locked door. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. "For your protection, child, and for ours." Protection. "You must be careful," Magda whispered, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed ancient. "The Alpha is not only cruel to his enemies. The beast within him, it grows stronger with each passing year. It's a sickness in his soul. He could kill you in a moment of rage and not even remember it afterward." The food on the tray suddenly seemed tasteless. "Why?" Rory asked, her voice barely a breath. "Why is he like this?" A profound sadness washed over Magda's features, softening the harsh lines of her face. Because 10 years ago, on a night of the blood moon, someone took everything he loved, his father, the old Alpha King, his mother, Our Luna Evelyn. Her voice cracked. And his little sister, Lily. He found them himself. Since that night, he has not been the same. He became a monster to hunt the monsters who did this, but he never found them. And so, the monster he became, it stayed. Magda bowed her head and slipped out of the room, the sound of the bolt sliding home, sealing Rory in with the ghost of the old woman's story. That night, sleep offered no escape. Rory lay in the vast, empty bed, the velvet sheets feeling like a shroud. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the room was filled with an oppressive silence. Then she heard it. A sound that drifted up from the depths of the castle. So low it was more of a vibration in her bones than a noise. It was a growl, a deep, guttural sound of pure, undiluted agony. It was the sound of a great beast, wounded and alone, roaring its pain at a sky that would not listen. It was the sound of her keeper, the Beast King. And for the first time, beneath her terror, a new and unwelcome emotion stirred in her heart, a pang of empathy for the monster in the dark. Dante's point of view. Sleep was a luxury he had been denied for a decade. Tonight, it was an impossibility. The girl Aurora was an infection in his mind. Her scent clung to the air in his study, a maddeningly sweet perfume of moonlight and rain-soaked earth. It called to the beast, a constant, low thrum of demand that echoed in his skull. Ours, mate, claim. He slammed his fist on the heavy oak desk, the wood groaning in protest. He would not be ruled by this. He was the Alpha King. He was in control. But the beast laughed, a snarling presence in the back of his mind. It had been growing stronger for 10 years, fed by his grief and rage. And now it had found something it wanted, something it recognized on a cellular, spiritual level he could not comprehend. Go to her. No, he growled into the empty room. She is alone, frightened, ours to protect, ours to claim. He stalked to the window, staring out at the unforgiving peaks of his domain. He was the monster in this castle. He was the thing to be feared. The last thing she needed was him. The scent of blood was always on his hands. He couldn't touch anyone without feeling the phantom slickness of it. Without seeing Lily's lifeless eyes, he would only break her. He fought it for hours, pacing his chambers like a caged wolf, the pressure in his chest building until he thought his ribs would crack. But the beast's pull was relentless, an invisible chain wrapped around his soul, dragging him towards her. Finally, with a roar of self-loathing, he gave in. Control was an illusion. The beast was winning. He moved through the sleeping castle, a shadow among shadows. The guards outside her door stiffened as he approached, their heads bowing in submission and fear. He waved them away with a flick of his wrist. He didn't need a key. The ancient lock yielded to the force of his will, the bolt sliding back with a soft click. He slipped inside. The room was bathed in the soft orange glow of dying embers. She was curled on her side in the massive bed, looking small and impossibly fragile. He could hear the soft, hitching sound of her breathing and knew, with a sharp pang in his chest, that she was crying in her sleep. A flicker of guilt, alien and unwelcome, pricked at him. He was the cause of those tears. He pushed the feeling down, burying it under a fresh wave of possessiveness. He was what he was. He could not change it. Rory's point of view. She was dreaming of falling, a familiar dream, where the ground rushed up to meet her in a terrifying blur, but this time, a scent pulled her from the nightmare, pine and cold stone, the scent of the Beast King. Her eyes snapped open. He was there, standing at the foot of her bed, a towering silhouette against the dying fire. His eyes were not amber. They were glowing, two burning crimson coals in the darkness, fixed entirely on her. A scream died in her throat, choked off by pure primal terror. She scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the cold stone of the headboard, pulling the velvet sheets up to her chin like a flimsy shield. He moved towards the bed, his steps utterly silent. He didn't speak. He just came closer, his oppressive presence sucking all the air from the room. He stopped beside the bed, looming over her. She could feel the heat of his body, see the tense cord of muscle in his jaw. She was trapped, a mouse cornered by a lion. He lowered himself to sit on the edge of the mattress, the bed dipping under his weight. Rory flinched, expecting a blow, a rough touch, but he did nothing. He just sat there, so close, his crimson gaze burning into her. He finally raised a hand, and she squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact, but his touch never came when she dared to peek. His hand was hovering in the air, inches from her face, his fingers trembling with a barely contained force. He looked at his own hand as if it were a weapon he didn't trust. "I don't know what you are," he whispered, his voice a raw, gravelly sound that vibrated through the air between them, "or why you are here. But my beast, it wants you." Before she could process his words, he leaned in. His face was in the curve of her neck, his breath hot against her skin. She froze, every muscle in her body screaming to flee, but she was paralyzed by a terrifying, hypnotic stillness. He inhaled deeply, a possessive, hungry sound. "Mine," he growled against her skin. Then she felt the sharp pressure of his fangs against the sensitive flesh just below her ear. It wasn't the brutal, soul-tearing bite of a true mating mark she'd heard stories about. It was something else, a sharp, stinging pinch, more of a brand than a bond. Pain, hot and electric, shot through her, followed by a dizzying, unwanted wave of pleasure. He pulled back, and a single drop of his saliva sizzled on the tiny wound, healing it almost instantly but leaving behind a faint, silvery mark, like a shadow on her skin. His red eyes were glazed, pupils blown wide with a primal satisfaction. "Now," he murmured, his voice thick, "every wolf in this castle will know who you belong to. No one will dare touch what is mine." He stood as silently as he had come and walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. Rory was left trembling, her hand pressed to her neck where his teeth had been. The skin tingled. Branded by his claim, she should have felt nothing but terror. She should have been repulsed. But as the fear began to recede, it was replaced by something else, something terrifying in its own right, a strange, inexplicable sense of safety, a feeling that her soul, against all logic, was being pulled toward his, a moth drawn to a raging, beautiful, and deadly flame. The next morning, the mark on her neck felt like a physical weight. It was a faint, almost invisible silver tracery, but to the heightened senses of the werewolves in the castle, it might as well have been a blazing neon sign. Property of the Alpha King. The servants who brought her breakfast didn't meet her eyes. They set her tray down and fled, their fear now mixed with a new, grudging respect. She was no longer just a sacrifice. She was the beast's chosen obsession. It afforded her a strange, precarious status. She was exploring the bookshelves, her fingers tracing the gold leaf on an ancient tome, when the door to her chamber was thrown open. It wasn't a servant this time. The woman who stood there was breathtakingly beautiful. She had fiery red hair that cascaded down her back in perfect waves, eyes the color of emeralds, and a figure that was all sharp, elegant curves. She wore a gown of deep green silk that clung to her like a second skin. Power radiated from her, the confident, predatory aura of a high-ranking beta. "So," the woman said, her voice like honey laced with poison, "you're the little omega stray my fiancé has taken in." She glided into the room, her eyes raking over Rory with undisguised contempt. Her gaze snagged on the mark on Rory's neck, and her perfectly shaped lips tightened into a thin, ugly line. "My name is Sienna Vale," she announced, as if the name itself should bring Rory to her knees. "I have been at Dante's side for 5 years. I was to be his Luna, and you are the pathetic little debt payment that has somehow caught his eye." Rory said nothing, her hand instinctively going to her neck. She would not let this woman see her fear. Sienna laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Don't bother hiding it. I can smell his scent all over you, a desperate mark of possession on a worthless creature. You are nothing. Do you understand? A temporary distraction, a toy. Once he tires of you, he will break you and throw you away. He always does." Rory remained silent, her gaze fixed on a point just over Sienna's shoulder. She had endured years of Marcus's taunts. She would not break for this woman. Her silence seemed to infuriate Sienna more than any retort could have. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you, you little gutter rat." But as Sienna spoke, a strange thing happened. A whisper of the voice from the cellar echoed in Rory's mind. "Do not let them diminish you, child of silver." A spark of defiance, cold and clear as starlight, ignited within her. She lifted her chin and met Sienna's furious green eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but steady. "If I am just a toy," she asked, "then why do you fear me so much?" The question hung in the air, stunning Sienna into silence, her beautiful face contorted with rage. "You insolent!" She lunged forward, her hand raised to strike, but before her palm could connect with Rory's cheek, a strong arm shot out, catching Sienna's wrist in an iron grip. Theo stood in the doorway, his normally kind face set in a hard, uncompromising line. "That's enough, Sienna." "Let go of me!" "Theo," Sienna shrieked, struggling in his grasp. "This little whore needs to be taught her place." "Her place," Theo said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature, "is under the Alpha's protection. He gave a direct order. No one touches her, unless you have a death wish. I suggest you leave, now." He released her wrist with a shove. Sienna stumbled back, rubbing the red mark he'd left. She shot Rory a look of pure, venomous hatred. It was a promise of future pain. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out of the room. Theo sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. He looked at Rory, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "That was foolish," he said, but there was no heat in his words. "And very brave." Dante's point of view. The news of Sienna's confrontation reached him within minutes. The beast inside him roared, not with the agony he was used to, but with a white-hot, protective fury. Sienna had dared to threaten what was his. He found her in the Great Hall, attempting to rally support among some of the senior pack members. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Sienna," he said. The single word cut through the chatter, bringing an immediate, dead silence to the hall. She turned, her face a mask of false sweetness. "Dante, my love, I was just—" "You will pack your things and be gone from this castle by nightfall," he stated, his voice flat and cold as a tombstone. "Your family's trade agreements with the Ashford pack are hereby terminated. Your access to the pack's treasury is revoked. You are no longer welcome in my territory." The color drained from her face. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Publicly banishing his longtime fiancé was unprecedented. Tears welled in her emerald eyes. Real or fake, he didn't care. "Dante, please!" she cried, rushing to his side, trying to take his arm. He stepped away, as if from something unclean. "I love you. I have stood by you for 5 years, through all of it. Why would you throw me away for her, a nobody, a weak little Omega?" He looked down at her, and for the first time, he felt nothing, no lingering affection, no regret, only a vast, cold emptiness. "Because my beast chose her," he said, the words echoing with a finality that could not be challenged. "And you no longer mean anything at all." He turned and walked away, not looking back at the sound of her broken sobs. He didn't see the hatred that burned away her tears, solidifying her grief into a plan for cold, brutal revenge. All he felt was a grim satisfaction. He had protected his prize. And the beast, for the first time in a long time, was quiet. Theo, perhaps feeling a measure of guilt for the castle's oppressive atmosphere, granted Rory permission to walk in the castle gardens. It was a limited freedom, flanked by 2 stoic guards who shadowed her every move, but it was a taste of open air she desperately craved. The garden was a place of ghosts. It was a large, walled courtyard that had once been magnificent. Stone benches crumbled under blankets of moss, and elaborate trellises stood bare, their climbing vines long dead. In the center was a vast circular bed of what Rory recognized as white rose bushes, but every single one was withered and brown, the stems brittle, the petals long since turned to dust. It was a garden of skeletons. Magda, who had taken to checking on Rory with a quiet, maternal concern, found her there. "It's a sad sight, isn't it?" the old woman murmured, joining Rory by the edge of the dead flower bed. "What happened here?" Rory asked. "This was Luna Evelyn's garden," Magda explained, her voice thick with memory. "The Alpha's mother. She had a gift with living things. These white roses, they were her pride. They said she could coax a bloom from a dead branch." Magda sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. "She died in this very garden, during the attack. 10 years ago, and since that day, not a single flower has bloomed in this castle. It's as if the land itself is in mourning." Rory stared at the dead, thorny branches. An inexplicable sadness for a woman she'd never met washed over her, on impulse. She knelt down, ignoring the protest of the guards, and reached out a hand. Her fingers brushed against the cold, dry earth at the base of the most central rosebush. She closed her eyes, thinking of the life that had once been here, of the kind Luna who had tended it, and as she did, she felt a strange warmth spread from her palm into the soil. It was a gentle, silvery hum, like a soft lullaby. When she opened her eyes and pulled her hand back, she gasped. There, pushing up through the dark soil where her hand had been, was a tiny, vibrant green sprout. Her heart hammered in her chest. Magic! This was impossible. Fearing the guards would see, she quickly scraped some loose dirt over the sprout, her mind reeling. What was happening to her? That night, the heavy door to her chamber opened again. She expected the crimson-eyed beast of the previous night, but the Dante who entered was different. The rage in his eyes was banked, leaving behind only the deep, aching exhaustion she'd seen in Theo. He didn't approach her bed. Instead, he walked to the barred window and stood there, staring out at the jagged peaks. His broad shoulders slumped. He looked lonely. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the menacing silence of before. It was a shared, sorrowful quiet, spurred by a courage she didn't know she possessed. Rory spoke, her voice a whisper in the dark room. "Why do they call you the Beast King?" He didn't turn. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, haunted rasp. "Because I am one." He finally turned from the window, his amber eyes finding hers in the dim light. 10 years ago, a rival pack, the Moonwood clan, attacked this castle under the cover of the Blood Moon, or so we were told. They were ruthless. They breached the walls, slaughtering my father's royal guard. He paused, and the pain in his expression was so raw, so naked, that Rory had to look away. I was young, arrogant. I was leading a patrol on the southern border. By the time I got the call and returned, it was too late. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet room. I found my father in the throne room, his throat torn out, and my mother. She was in her garden, trying to shield my little sister with her own body. His voice broke on the last words. She was 8. I held her. I swore on her body that I would avenge them, that I would hunt down every last member of the Moonwood Pack and eradicate them from this earth. And you did, Rory whispered, repeating the rumors she'd heard. Yes, he confirmed, his voice devoid of any triumph. I hunted them for a month, found their camp. I didn't give them the honor of a formal challenge. I attacked in the night, 47 of them. I killed them all, man, woman, child. I became the monster they had made me. He looked down at his own hands, flexing his fingers. But it didn't fix anything. The guilt, the rage, it only grew. It fed the beast inside me. It's a curse, a poison. It gets stronger every day. And I know, one day, I will lose control completely. One day, the beast will be all that is left. He fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them for the first time. Rory didn't see a monster. She saw a broken boy, drowning in a grief so profound it had reshaped his very soul. And in that shared darkness, a fragile, dangerous connection began to take root. Her dreams became a sanctuary. They were no longer filled with falling, but with light. She found herself in a field of moon-petal flowers, their silver-white blossoms glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. A woman stood in the center of the field, her back to Rory. She was tall and regal, with hair that flowed down her back like a river of molten silver. The woman never showed her face, but her voice was the same one Rory had heard in the cellar, calm, loving, and filled with an ancient power. "You must remember, my child," the woman would say, her voice a song in Rory's mind. "The past is not dead. Your blood is the key. Remember who you are." Rory would always wake up with tears on her cheeks and a name on her lips she didn't recognize Seraphine. One morning, after a particularly vivid dream, she stumbled to the ornate mirror above the wash basin and froze. For a split second, her eyes, normally a muted slate gray, were glowing. They were the color of liquid silver, radiating the same soft light as the flowers in her dreams. The glow faded as quickly as it appeared, leaving her staring at her own wide, frightened reflection. This was more than just a strange reaction to a new place. Something was awakening inside her. Driven by a desperate need for answers, she sought out Theo. She found him in the castle's vast library, a place that smelled wonderfully of old paper and beeswax. "I need to read," she told him, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to understand the history of the packs, the old laws." Theo studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. He seemed to sense this was more than idle curiosity. "The Alpha King has not forbidden it," he said slowly. "Be careful what you go looking for. Aurora, some truths are better left buried." He left her there, surrounded by towering shelves of knowledge. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she let her instincts guide her. She ran her fingers along dusty spines, pulling out ancient, leather-bound histories. She read about pack lineages, territorial wars, and ancient magics. Finally, her fingers brushed against a book tucked away in a dark, forgotten corner. It was bound in what looked like white wolf hide, with a simple silver clasp. There was no title on the spine. A strange energy seemed to hum from it, a familiarity that called to her. She opened it. The pages were brittle with age, filled with elegant, hand-painted script. The title on the first page read, "A Lament for the Silver Moon, the History of the Silver Wolves." Her breath caught in her throat. The book described a legendary, royal bloodline of werewolves, believed to have been wiped out in a great purge over 50 years ago. They weren't just alphas. They were something more. They were said to be children of the moon itself, possessing incredible powers of healing and a unique connection to the spiritual world. They could make barren lands fertile, soothe the most savage of beasts, and their eyes were said to glow with silver light. Rory's hands trembled as she turned the page. There, taking up the entire leaf, was a beautifully painted portrait of the last known silver wolf queen. She stared into the painted face of a woman with regal features, a gentle smile, and a cascade of silver hair. It was the woman from her dreams. Dante's point of view. A scout interrupted his meeting with the War Council, his face pale with urgency. "Alpha King, a visitor demands an audience. He claims it is a matter of pack business." "I am not seeing visitors," Dante growled, his patience already worn thin by a debate over border patrols. "It is Alpha Marcus Blackwood, my lord," the scout stammered. Dante's head snapped up. An icy rage, cold and sharp, cut through him. What was that snake doing here? "He says he has come to check on his investment," the scout added nervously. The beast snarled in his mind. Investment. He calls her an investment. The urge to tear Marcus limb from limb was almost overwhelming. "Send him away," Dante commanded. "My lord, he threatened to go to the other northern alphas, to tell them you are being influenced by a Blackwood asset. He said he holds secrets about the girl that could destabilize your entire rule." Dante went still. Secrets? What secrets could a worthless Omega from a failing pack possibly hold yet? Marcus was not a fool. He wouldn't make such a bold threat without holding some kind of card. A dark suspicion began to form in Dante's mind. The deal had always felt wrong. Marcus had been too eager to give up his niece, too pleased with the arrangement. Why would he sell Rory to him? Why her, specifically? It wasn't a payment. It was a placement. Marcus had put her here for a reason, and Dante was suddenly, violently determined to find out what it was. The knowledge from the ancient book burned in Rory's mind. Silver wolves, eyes that glow, a gift with living things. She had to know. She slipped out to the dead garden, this time without guards. The staff had learned to give her a wide berth, their fear of the Alpha King's possessiveness overriding their duty to watch her. The air was cold and still, the gray sky pressing down. She knelt again by the central rose bush, by the tiny green sprout that was now a healthy, leafy stem. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the feeling from before the warmth, the silvery hum. She thought of the woman in her dreams, of the sad story of Luna Evelyn. She poured all her desperate hope, her confusion, and her burgeoning strength into the cold earth. This time, the feeling was a torrent, not a trickle. A wave of silvery energy surged from her, warm and powerful. It felt like moonlight given liquid form, flowing from her fingertips into the roots of the dead plants. When she opened her eyes, she cried out, scrambling backward. It wasn't just one sprout. The entire circular bed of roses had burst into impossible, vibrant life. Green leaves unfurled from brittle branches, and dozens of pearl-white buds swelled and opened, releasing a heavenly fragrance into the stagnant air. The garden was no longer dead. It was reborn. The effort left her dizzy, her head spinning. A warm trickle ran from her nose, and when she touched it, her fingers came away stained with blood. The power had a price. So, the rumors are true. Rory's head snapped up. Sienna Vale stood at the edge of the garden, her emerald eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning. Greedy realization. She had been watching the entire time. "You're not an Omega," Sienna breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and disgust. "That light, that power, you're a silver wolf, a monster, a thing of myth." Before Rory could react, Sienna's face twisted into a snarl of jealous fury. "He will never be yours. I won't let a freak like you take him from me." Sienna launched herself at Rory, her nails sharpened into claws. Aiming for her throat, Rory threw up her hands to defend herself, terror and instinct taking over. She didn't want to hurt Sienna, she just wanted her to stop. She pushed out with her hands, and the silvery energy, raw and uncontrolled, erupted from her. It was not the gentle, life-giving warmth from before. It was a concussive blast of pure force. The energy slammed into Sienna. Throwing her backward through the air, she landed in a heap 10 feet away. Groaning in pain, a small, dark object clattering from her hand onto the stone path. Her phone, it had been recording. The backlash of the power was too much. Rory's vision swam. Black spots dancing in front of her eyes, the world tilted sideways, and she collapsed onto the soft grass amidst the impossible white roses, the world fading to black. Dante's point of view. He felt it through the fledgling bond, a spike of pure terror from Rory, followed by a surge of strange, powerful energy, and then nothing. A sudden, terrifying silence in the space she occupied in his mind. He was moving before he even made a conscious decision, his council meeting forgotten. He burst from the throne room, his guards scrambling to keep up. He followed the pull of the bond, a frantic, invisible thread leading him out of the castle and into the courtyard. The scent of roses hit him first, a scent that hadn't graced this castle in 10 years. The sight of the garden, vibrant and alive with his mother's white roses, stopped him dead for a half second. Then he saw her. Rory, lying unconscious on the grass, a smear of blood under her nose, looking as fragile as a broken doll. A few yards away, Sienna was scrambling to her feet, clutching her phone and running for the opposite gate. Rage, hotter and more absolute than anything he had ever felt, consumed him, but it was overshadowed by a different emotion, one he hadn't experienced in a decade. Fear. Not the fear of an enemy, but the gut-wrenching, soul-freezing fear of loss. He was at Rory's side in an instant, dropping to his knees. He gathered her into his arms, his touch surprisingly gentle, her head lolled back against his shoulder, her face pale as death. The silence from her side of the bond was a gaping wound in his soul. "Healer!" he roared, his voice echoing off the castle walls, a command that would be obeyed without question. He carried her back to her room, his long strides eating up the distance. He laid her on the velvet bed, his hands shaking as he brushed a strand of her dark-dyed hair from her face. The healer, a wizened old wolf, rushed in, his bag of herbs and potions clattering. Dante didn't leave. He stood by the bed, a silent, menacing statue. As the healer worked, he watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest, each breath a victory against the terror gripping his heart. When she finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open, a ragged breath of relief escaped him. Her gray eyes, clouded with confusion, found his. He sat on the edge of the bed and, for the first time, took her hand. Her skin was cool, her fingers delicate in his large, calloused grip. The bond between them flared to life again, a warm, comforting hum. "Don't you ever," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "scare me like that again." It was not the voice of a king to his property. It was the voice of a man terrified of losing the only light he'd found in a decade of darkness. The storm broke the next day. Sienna, driven by a vengeful fury, did not flee the territory. Instead, she went directly to the Pack Council, the assembly of elder alphas who served as advisors and a check on the king's power. And she showed them the video. The footage was shaky, but damningly clear. It showed Rory, standing in the miraculously blooming garden, her eyes glowing with an eerie silver light. It showed her blasting Sienna backward with a wave of unseen energy. It was irrefutable proof of a power that was not natural, not known, a power that reeked of dark magic. "She is a witch," Sienna declared to the assembled elders, her voice ringing with feigned terror and righteous indignation. "She has enchanted our Alpha King. This dark magic is how she has turned him against his own pack, against his betrothed. She is a parasite, a danger to us all. The ancient laws are clear. She must be tried." The council was in an uproar. They were old-fashioned, deeply suspicious of anything that deviated from tradition. The idea of an unknown Omega wielding such power, of their beast king being enchanted, struck a deep chord of fear and paranoia. They demanded an audience with Dante. They found him in the throne room, the heavy weight of his new reality settling upon him. "You have seen the video." Dante stated it was not a question. Elder Kale, the council's stern, gray-muzzled leader, stepped forward. The law is absolute. Alpha King. Any wolf found wielding unsanctioned magic outside the known lines of shifter power, must be put on trial. If found guilty of endangering the pack, the sentence is death. The beast in Dante snarled, a low, rumbling threat. "She will not be tried." "You would defy the council. You would defy the ancient laws for this creature," Kale challenged, his own alpha authority rising to meet Dante's. "Protecting a sorceress is an act of treason. If you will not uphold our laws, the council can and will move to have you deposed." The threat hung in the air, thick and heavy, his crown, his entire kingdom. For a girl he barely knew, a girl who was becoming the center of his world. Theo, who had been standing silently by Dante's side, spoke up, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. "Dante, they are right about the law. You cannot simply refuse. If you do, you'll lose your throne, and they will kill her anyway. Our only choice is to face the trial, to prove she is not what Sienna claims." Dante looked from Theo's earnest face to the hard, unyielding expressions of the elders. He was trapped. To protect her, he had to submit her to the very process designed to kill her. Rory's point of view. 2 guards came for her. They weren't the usual stoic sentinels. These were members of the council's elite guard, their eyes cold and hostile. They shackled her again, but this time the chains were not iron. They were made of gleaming, polished silver. The moment the metal touched her skin, she felt her newfound energy drain away, leaving her weak and dizzy, as if her very lifeblood were being siphoned off. They moved her from her comfortable tower room to a cold, barren cell in the dungeons. There was no fire, only a single slit of a window high on the wall that let in a sliver of gray light. She was truly a prisoner now. The worst part was the silence, the bond she had just begun to explore. The fragile connection to Dante's soul was muffled, dampened by the silver and the stone walls. She could feel him, but it was like hearing a shout through a thick wall. She could feel his rage, his frustration, and something that twisted her heart into a painful knot, his hesitation. He was the king. He could stop this, but he wasn't, and that doubt hurt more than any chains. Late that night, a figure appeared in the shadows outside her cell. "I must admit," Marcus Blackwood said, his voice a smug, oily whisper that slithered through the bars, "this has all worked out even better than I'd planned." Rory stared at her uncle, a cold dread washing over her. You knew this would happen." "Of course I knew," he sneered, his eyes glittering in the gloom. "Sienna is a predictable, jealous fool, and Dante is a slave to his beast's instincts. I knew if I put you in his path, chaos would follow. I just didn't expect you to be quite so spectacular." His gaze was knowing and utterly terrifying. "All that power," he mused. "Our family has worked for generations to keep it hidden, to keep you weak and unassuming, and here you are, putting on a light show for the entire northern court." The realization hit her like a physical blow. "You know what I am." "I know exactly what you are," he hissed, his face close to the bars. "And soon, you'll be exactly what you were always meant to be, a dead secret. You'll die in their trial. This castle will descend into civil war over their enchanted king, and I will be perfectly positioned to pick up the pieces. All of it goes according to plan." He laughed, a low, chilling sound, and melted back into the shadows, leaving Rory with the horrifying truth. This wasn't a tragic series of events. It was a meticulously crafted conspiracy, and she was the sacrificial pawn at the center of it all. The great hall had been transformed into a tribunal. The pack council sat on a raised dais, their faces grim and judgmental. The stone floor was packed with the werewolves of Ashford Castle, their expressions a mixture of fear, suspicion, and morbid curiosity. Rory was led to the center of the hall, her silver chains clanking with every step. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, condemning her. She stood alone, small and defenseless in the vast, hostile space. Then she saw Dante. He was seated on his throne of black stone, elevated above even the council. His face was an unreadable mask of granite, but she could feel the turmoil rolling off him through their muted bond, a maelstrom of rage and helplessness. Sienna was the first to speak, her voice dripping with venomous sincerity. She presented her video, the images of Rory's power playing out on a large, magically projected screen. She brought forth servants, their eyes downcast, who had been bribed or threatened into giving false testimony. She chants in a strange tongue at night, one maid claimed, her voice trembling. I saw her turn water into ice with a single touch. A stable hand lied. Rory said nothing in her own defense. How could she? She didn't understand her own power. She couldn't explain what had happened in the garden, or the voice in her dreams, or the silver glow in her eyes. Any attempt would only sound like the ravings of a mad woman, or the confessions of a witch. Finally, Elder Cale stood. The evidence is damning. The law is clear. He turned his hard gaze not on Rory, but on Dante. Alpha King Ashford, it is your duty as ruler of these lands. You must carry out the sentence. You will execute the witch, as prescribed by ancient law. A collective gasp went through the hall. He was being commanded to kill her with his own hands. All eyes turned to Dante. The silence was absolute, thick with anticipation. Rory's heart stopped. This was it, the moment of his choice, his throne, or her life. Dante sat motionless for what felt like an eternity. The beast was raging within him, a silent scream of protest that she could just barely feel. No, not her hours, protect. Then, slowly, deliberately, he rose from his throne. He did not walk towards the council's executioner to take the ceremonial silver axe. Instead, he descended the steps of his dais and walked directly towards Rory. The crowd parted before him like the sea. He stopped in front of her, his amber eyes locking with hers. In their depths, she saw no hesitation, only a fierce, unwavering resolve that stole her breath. And then, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the Beast King, the most feared wolf on the continent, did the unthinkable. He knelt. He knelt on the cold stone floor before her, the chained and condemned prisoner. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the hall. With his own hands, he took hold of the silver chains that bound her. He pulled, the enchanted metal, designed to be unbreakable, screamed in protest before snapping in his grip, the links scattering across the floor. He rose to his full height, pulling her up with him. He stood between her and the council, a living shield. He turned to face the stunned elders, his voice ringing with absolute, unchallengeable power. "If you want to kill her," he roared, the sound vibrating in the very stones of the castle, "you will have to kill me first. She is not a witch. She is my mate, and I will not allow anyone to lay a hand on her." The declaration my mate hit the hall like a thunderclap. Shouts erupted, some of support, some of outrage. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus Blackwood's voice cut through the noise. "A bold claim, Lord Ashford," he shouted, stepping forward from the crowd, his face a mask of false concern, but a convenient one. "If she is truly your mate, then prove it. The ancient laws provide a way, the marking ritual." A hush fell over the crowd. The marking ritual was a sacred, dangerous ceremony, a test. "If she is your true mate," Marcus challenged, a cruel glint in his eye. "She will survive your mark, but if she is not, if she is a witch who has merely ensnared you, the power of an Alpha King's soul will burn her from the inside out. She will die." He had backed Dante into a corner. To refuse was to admit doubt. To accept was to risk killing her himself. The entire pack gathered in the main courtyard under the cold light of the full moon. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the crackling of torches. Rory stood in the center of a circle of stones, Dante facing her. The choice had been hers, and she had accepted. She would rather die by his hand, trusting him, than by the council's judgment, condemned by lies. The marking ritual was a complete and total joining of souls. Dante would have to bite her. Not the possessive claim he'd given her before, but a deep, permanent bite that would physically mark her as his mate. Through that bite, he would pour a portion of his own life force, his alpha spirit, into her. If their souls were truly compatible, truly fated, her body would accept his power, and the bond would be forged, unbreakable even by death. If they were not, his raw, untamed alpha energy, the power of the Beast King, would incinerate her from within. Dante looked at her, his amber eyes filled with a terrifying vulnerability. For the first time, she saw fear in him, fear for her. "Rory," he murmured, his voice for her ears alone. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," she whispered back, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. "I do. I trust you." The words seemed to steady him. He nodded once, his jaw set. Elder Kyle began the ancient chant, his voice rising and falling in the crisp night air. Dante stepped forward, his hands coming up to cup her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He tilted her head to the side, exposing the smooth, pale skin of her neck. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "I'm sorry for the pain," he whispered. Then he bit down. Agony, white-hot and absolute, exploded through her. It was 1,000 times worse than his first mark. It felt as if lightning had struck her, a searing, tearing pain that ripped a scream from her lungs. His fangs sank deep into her flesh, and she felt the rush of his power, his very soul, flooding into her. It was a torrent, a raging river of ancient strength. Grief, an untamed fury. It was too much. Her body couldn't take it. Her vision blackened at the edges. She was dying. But then, something else rose up to meet the flood. From the depths of her own soul, a different power awakened. It was not hot and furious like his, but cool and serene, a tranquil sea of silver light. It met his raging river not with force, but with acceptance, surrounding it, calming it, intertwining with it. Her body began to glow. A soft, ethereal silver light emanated from her skin, pouring out from the wound on her neck. The pack gasped. The light grew brighter, more intense, until she was a beacon of moonlight in the dark courtyard. The pain receded, replaced by a feeling of wholeness, of coming home. The two powers, his raging gold and her serene silver, merged into one. The wound on her neck healed, but it did not disappear. In its place, a new mark formed, glowing with silver light before settling into her skin. It was not the simple teeth marks of a normal alpha's claim. It was an elegant, intricate crescent moon, cradling a snarling wolf's head. It was the ancient crest of the silver wolves, a symbol no one had seen for half a century. The bond slammed into place, no longer muffled or distant. It was a clear, open channel between their minds, their hearts, their souls. She felt his shock, his awe, his overwhelming relief. And he felt her everything. Dante's point of view. The moment the bond solidified, her mind opened to him. He was flooded with her feelings, her fear, her trust, her pain, her impossible strength. But he got more than just her feelings. He got her memories. Flickering images of a life of servitude, of Marcus's cruelty, of her loneliness. And then he saw something else, a memory she didn't even know she had, a memory that had been locked away behind a powerful seal, a seal that their new bond had just shattered. The scene is a forest, drenched in the eerie red light of a blood moon. It's 18 years ago. A tall, handsome man with silver white hair is running, crashing through the undergrowth. He is clutching a small child in his arms, a little girl, no older than 5, with the same shimmering silver hair and wide, frightened eyes. The girl is Rory. Behind them, the howls of pursuing wolves echo through the trees. They are gaining. The man stumbles, his leg bleeding from a deep wound. He knows he won't make it. He sets the little girl down behind an ancient oak tree, his hands trembling as he traces a glowing symbol on her forehead. "I'm so sorry, my little moonbeam," the man whispers, tears streaming down his face. "This will hide you. It will make you forget, but it will keep you alive. Always remember. Your name is Aurora Moonshadow." He casts the spell, a powerful curse of concealment. The little girl's silver hair fades to a dull brown. The light in her eyes dims. Her memories cloud over. The pursuing wolves burst into the clearing. At their head is a younger, leaner, but no less cruel-looking Marcus Blackwood. The silver-haired man stands to face them, drawing a silver sword. "You will not have her," he roars. But he is outnumbered. The fight is brutal and short. When it is over, the man lies dead in the blood-soaked leaves. Marcus walks over to the oak tree and finds the small, dazed girl. He picks her up. "Well now," Marcus whispers, a triumphant, greedy smile on his face. "This will be useful when the time is right." The memory ended. Dante pulled back from Rory, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind reeled. The bond was feeding him the truth. Her father, the Silver Wolf, casting a spell to change her, to hide her, turning her into a fake Omega. Marcus finding her. He slowly lifted his gaze from Rory's bewildered face and looked across the courtyard. He found Marcus Blackwood in the crowd. And for the first time, Dante understood. This was never about a debt. This was about a secret Marcus had been keeping for 18 years. He had used Rory, his own hidden, royal-blooded niece, as a weapon to be deployed against him. The beast inside Dante roared, but it was a new sound. It was not the sound of mindless rage or grief. It was the sound of cold, focused, absolute certainty. The scent of blood was on the air again, but this time, he knew exactly who it belonged to. The shared memory was just the beginning. With the curse of concealment broken, a dam of forgotten knowledge burst within Rory's mind. The visions came in a flood, overwhelming and dizzying. She saw a life she never knew she'd lived, a grand, sunlit castle, not of cold stone but of white marble, a loving father, not an alpha, but an alpha king named Lucian Moonshadow, the last king of the Silver Wolves, ruler of a territory that had bordered the Ashford lands. She saw a mother, Seraphine, the woman from her dreams, a high priestess with a gentle smile and hands that glowed with healing light. She saw herself, a happy child with gleaming silver hair, and beside her, always, a boy who was her mirror image, a twin brother. His name was Lycan. Then came the darkness, the blood moon, an attack on their castle, not by a rival pack, but by shadowy figures, wolves whose scents were twisted with dark, forbidden magic. She saw her mother falling, her brother gone. She remembered her father grabbing her, running, the desperate flight through the woods, his final sacrifice. The most horrifying piece of the puzzle slammed into place, a truth so terrible it nearly brought her to her knees. The attack on her family, the Moonshadows, had happened on the exact same night as the attack on Dante's family, the Ashfords. It wasn't two separate tragedies, it was one single, coordinated slaughter, a coup. Marcus Blackwood hadn't just stumbled upon the aftermath, he was part of it. He had conspired with this dark force to eliminate both ruling families, the two most powerful bloodlines in the North, clearing the way for his own ascent to power. She looked at Dante, her eyes wide with the horror of their shared history. Through the bond, she felt his own shock as he received the same torrent of truth. His family's murderers and her family's murderers were one and the same. He reached for her, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together. It was not a gesture of comfort, but of solidarity, a silent vow. He was no longer her captor. She was no longer his prisoner. They were survivors. They were allies. They were the last remnants of a legacy their enemies had tried to erase from the world. Dante's point of view. The truth hit him like a physical blow, rearranging his entire world. For 10 years, he had been a beast hunting shadows, his rage a directionless storm. Now, that storm had an eye. Marcus Blackwood. Marcus. His grief had been a solitary prison. Now, he was sharing it. He looked at Rory at Aurora Moonshadow and saw not an Omega, not a possession, but his equal, a fellow victim of the same devastating crime. She had lost as much as he had been living a lie for nearly 2 decades, while he had been drowning in a truth he couldn't escape. And for the first time in 10 long years, the beast inside him fell silent. The endless, agonizing roar of grief and vengeance that had been his constant companion simply ceased. It was not gone. It was waiting. It had found its true purpose. It was no longer a wild, destructive force. It was a weapon, honed and ready, waiting for its master's command. Its purpose was not just revenge anymore. It was to protect her, to protect their mate, the last silver wolf. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise passing between them. He would help her reclaim her past, and together, they would burn their shared enemy to the ground. The Pack Council, Marcus, Sienna, they all faded into the background. They were looking at a king and his mate, their bond proven in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The trial was over. But the war had just begun. In the days that followed the marking, the atmosphere in Ashford Castle shifted completely. Rory was no longer a prisoner, but its revered, if mysterious, Luna. Servants who had once feared her now bowed in awe. The council, humbled and ashamed, pledged their unwavering loyalty. The story of the lost Silver Wolf princess, revealed by the sacred ritual, became a legend whispered in the halls. But for Dante and Rory, there was no time for ceremony. They had a ghost to hunt. With Theo's help, they turned the castle upside down, searching for any connection, any clue that might link Marcus to the massacre 10 years prior. Theo, a meticulous record keeper, dove into the pack archives, cross-referencing trade logs, patrol reports, and diplomatic correspondences from that fateful year. "It doesn't make sense," Theo said. Days later, rubbing his tired eyes, he was in Dante's study, surrounded by stacks of dusty ledgers. At the time of the attack, the Blackwood pack was small, financially ruined. Marcus had no army, no resources to orchestrate something of this scale. He couldn't have taken down the Ashfords and the Moonshadows alone. He wasn't alone, Dante growled, pacing before the fireplace. Rory's memories were of wolves tainted with dark magic. Exactly. Theo pushed a small, locked chest across the desk. "I found this hidden in the old diplomatic vault. It contains unsent letters from your father, written in the weeks before his death." Dante pried the chest open. The letters, written in his father's strong, familiar hand, spoke of a growing concern. He wrote of a shadow spreading from the south, a new unnamed alpha who was consolidating power through fear and forbidden rituals, an alpha who was trying to form a dark alliance. In the final unfinished letter, his father had written, "I fear Marcus Blackwood has fallen under his influence." He speaks of a master who has promised him power beyond measure. "A master," Dante read aloud. the word tasting like poison. Marcus was just a pawn, a lieutenant. And this dark alpha, Theo added grimly, is likely still out there. He's the one who pulled the strings. He's the true enemy. Rory's point of view. While Dante and Theo hunted for clues in the past, Rory looked inward. Her powers, now unbound, were a wild, untamed river within her. She needed to learn control. Her guide came to her in her dreams. Her mother, Seraphine, no longer stood with her back to her. Now, she faced her, her silver eyes filled with love and pride. "You have awoken, my child." Seraphine's voice echoed in her mind. "The blood of the moon flows through you. It is a power of creation, of healing, of light." "But I hurt Sienna," Rory confessed in her dream state. "I used it as a weapon." "The moon has two faces," her mother explained patiently, "a gentle light that nurtures, and a tidal force that can shatter stone. You must learn to control both. Your power is more than a weapon. It is a cure." "A cure for what?" Seraphine's dream form grew solemn. "The beast inside your mate. It is not his grief alone that makes him rage on the night of the attack. He was wounded by a blade laced with the Dark Alpha's magic. It was a slow-acting poison, designed to corrupt his spirit, to turn his wolf into an uncontrollable monster over time. That is why he's losing control." The revelation struck Rory with the force of a physical blow. Dante's struggle wasn't just psychological, he was cursed. "But you, my daughter, are the antidote," Seraphine continued. "The light of the silver wolves can purify dark magic. You are the key to saving him, to healing the curse. But be warned, to do so will require all of your strength. You must be ready." Rory awoke with a new sense of purpose. Her power wasn't a danger, it was their only hope. She had to become strong enough to wield it, strong enough to face the darkness that had haunted both their families, and strong enough to save the man she was realizing she was falling in love with. Sienna Vale had not been banished. After the revelation of the marking, Dante had allowed her to stay, a disgraced but still present member of the pack. It was a mistake. Her public humiliation had curdled into a venomous, obsessive need for revenge. She was the perfect tool for Marcus to wield. He met her in secret, in the dead of night in a ruined abbey on the edge of the territory. He preyed on her wounded pride, her jealousy, her blind ambition. "He never loved you, Sienna," Marcus whispered, his voice a poisonous balm on her raw emotions. "He sees you as a political piece, but that thing, his beast craves her. As long as she is alive, you will never be his Luna." "What can I do?" Sienna hissed, tears of frustration glittering in her eyes. "He is the king, and she is some magical princess. They are all in awe of her." "Awe can quickly turn to fear," Marcus said, producing a small, dark vial from within his cloak. It was filled with a thick, black liquid that seemed to absorb the light. "This is wolfsbane essence, enhanced with the master's own magic. A single drop in his wine will not kill him. It will do something far worse. It will sever the leash between the man and the beast. It will unleash the monster he has been fighting for 10 years, in its purest, most uncontrollable form." Sienna stared at the vial, her eyes widening. "He will become a true monster," Marcus continued, pressing the vial into her hand. "He will attack everyone, everything. He won't recognize friend from foe, not even his precious new mate. The council will have no choice but to put him down. They will have to kill their king to save the pack, and with him gone." "The path will be clear," Sienna finished, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her face. Marcus would make his move, and she, as the one who bravely tried to warn everyone about Rory's evil, would be rewarded. Rory's point of view. A grand feast was held in the Great Hall to formally celebrate the confirmation of the new Luna. The hall was filled with music and laughter, But Rory couldn't shake a sense of unease. A cold dread settled in her stomach that had nothing to do with the watching crowd. Through the bond, she could feel Dante was on edge, the silence of his beast feeling less like peace and more like the stillness before an earthquake. She watched as Sienna, her face a perfect mask of polite deference, approached the head table. She offered Dante a goblet of deep red wine. "A toast, my king," Sienna said, her voice smooth as silk, "to your new bond and to the future of the Ashford pack." It was a public gesture of peace, an offering of reconciliation. Dante, ever the king, accepted the goblet with a nod. But as he raised it to his lips, Rory felt a violent, sickening lurch through the bond. It was a wave of pure corruption, of foul, dark magic. It was coming from the cup. "No!" Rory cried, lunging across the space between their chairs. She slammed into Dante's arm, her hand hitting the base of the goblet. The heavy silver cup flew from his grasp, wine splashing across the stone floor in a dark, crimson arc. But it was too late. He had already taken a sip. Rory watched in horror as his amber eyes widened. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. He clutched his chest, his knuckles turning white. Then he looked at her, but it wasn't Dante looking at her anymore. His eyes were swirling, the amber being consumed by a violent, bloody red. A low, guttural snarl ripped from his throat, a sound that was purely animal, purely monstrous. The beast was free, and it didn't recognize her at all. The transformation was brutally fast. Dante roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury that shattered the festive atmosphere of the hall. His body convulsed, bones snapping and reforming with sickening cracks. His fine clothes tore away as dark, coarse fur sprouted from his skin. In seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood a monster. It was a wolf, but a wolf of nightmare proportions. It was half again as large as the biggest dire wolf, its fur the color of midnight, its muscles cording like thick ropes beneath its hide. Its lips were pulled back in a permanent snarl, revealing teeth like daggers, and its eyes were two burning pits of pure, crimson rage. This was not Dante's wolf. This was the cursed beast, unleashed and utterly feral. Panic erupted. The pack members screamed, scrambling away from the throne. Tables overturning, food and wine spilling across the floor. The beast paid them no mind. Its red eyes were fixed on one target, Rory, in its corrupted vision. She was the source of its agony, the thing that had just attacked its human half. It lunged. Rory barely had time to throw herself aside as the beast crashed onto the spot where she had been standing, its massive claws gouging deep furrows in the stone dais. It whirled around, faster than anything that large should be able to move, and swiped at her. One of its claws caught her side, tearing through her gown and the flesh beneath. The pain was sharp and blinding, sending her sprawling to the floor. "Dante," she cried out, her voice choked with pain and desperation. "It's me, it's Rory." She tried to reach him through the bond, to push past the wall of rage and find the man she knew was trapped inside. But it was like screaming into a hurricane. All she got back was a tidal wave of bloodlust, confusion, and agony. The castle guards, recovering from their initial shock, drew their silver swords and began to form a perimeter. "Protect the Luna!" Theo yelled, his own sword in hand, his face pale but determined. "Don't kill him. Subdue him." But subduing the beast was impossible. It was a whirlwind of black fur and red rage, tossing aside trained warriors like dolls. It broke through their line with contemptuous ease, its focus never leaving Rory. It was hunting her. Rory scrambled to her feet, clutching her bleeding side. She was his mate. The bond was supposed to be sacred, but the poison, the dark magic, had twisted it, turning his protective instincts into a predatory, murderous obsession. He was going to kill her, and then he would tear apart his own castle, his own pack, until they were forced to put him down. Marcus's plan was working perfectly. Rory backed away, her mind racing. The guards couldn't stop him. Theo couldn't stop him. She was the only one who could. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "You are the antidote. It will require all of your strength." She knew what she had to do. It was a desperate gamble. The power was still new to her, raw and untamed, trying to channel enough of it to purify a curse of this magnitude. It could destroy her. It could burn her out from the inside, leaving an empty shell. But as the beast gathered itself for another charge, its red eyes promising a swift and brutal death, she knew she had no other choice. She would save him, or she would die trying. The beast charged. The ground shook with the force of its paws. The panicked screams of the pack faded into a dull roar in Rory's ears. There was only the monster, a tidal wave of death and fury, bearing down on her. She stood her ground. Closing her eyes, she ignored the searing pain in her side and reached deep within herself, past the fear, past the doubt, to the cool, silver core of her power. She didn't try to summon it as a weapon, as a shield of force. She summoned it as her mother had told her, as a source of healing, a light in the darkness. "Dante," she called out, not with her voice, but with her soul, pouring all of her love, all of their shared memories, all of her desperate hope down the channel of their bond. "Come back to me. Remember Lily. Remember the roses. Remember me." For a split second, the beast faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed its monstrous features. A sliver of amber bled back into the corner of one of its red eyes. He was in there. He was fighting. It was the opening she needed. "Now," she whispered. She opened her eyes, and they were no longer gray. They were blazing with the pure, incandescent light of the full moon. A wave of silver energy erupted from her, not as a concussive blast, but as a gentle, engulfing tide. It wasn't violent, it was an embrace. The silver light washed over the beast, sinking into its dark fur, seeping into its very being. The creature roared, a sound of agony as the pure, clean magic warred with the dark, twisted curse that had poisoned its soul for a decade. Black. Smoky tendrils of energy began to rise from its body, dissolving into nothingness as the silver light touched them. Rory pushed harder, pouring more and more of herself into the purification. The strain was immense. Her nose began to bleed again. Her vision grew blurry, the edges of the great hall dissolving into gray mist. She felt her own life force draining away, feeding the silver flame. The beast thrashed, its powerful limbs weakening. The crimson in its eyes receded, beaten back by a tide of familiar, desperate amber. It stumbled, then fell to one knee, its massive head hanging low. A final, agonized howl tore from its throat, and then it collapsed, the silver light flaring one last time before it faded. Rory fell to her knees at the same moment, her strength completely gone. The world went dark. When she woke, it was to the feeling of a gentle hand stroking her hair. She was in her bed in the West Tower. The morning light streaming through the window. The pain in her side was a dull, healing ache. Dante was sitting in a chair beside her bed, his head in his hands. He looked up when he felt her stir. His eyes were his own, again clear, brilliant amber, free of the red taint, but they were filled with an agony of guilt that was almost unbearable to see. "Rory," he breathed, his voice raw. "You're back," she whispered, her own voice weak. "Because of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and took her hand, his grip trembling. "You saved me. You purified me. The curse, it's gone. The beast, it's quiet. It's at peace. For the first time." Tears welled in the Alpha King's eyes. "But I hurt you. He couldn't finish the sentence. "It wasn't you," she insisted, squeezing his hand. "It was the curse, and now it's broken." He shook his head, looking down at their joined hands. "The poison may be gone, but the man who put it there is not." His eyes lifted to hers, and the grief in them was being replaced by a cold, hard fire. It was the righteous fury of a king who had found his cause. "Marcus Blackwood and his master tried to destroy our families," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "They turned me into a monster and used you as a pawn. They have taken everything from us." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, their connection through the bond humming with a new, shared strength. "Now," he whispered, a promise made not just to her, but to the ghosts of their pasts. "We take everything from them." The last silver wolf and the healed beast king were finally united. The hunt was on, and this time, the monsters would be the ones who had to be afraid.